In the grand palace of Oyoland, whispers and rumors began to spread like wildfire. Weeks had passed since anyone had heard from King Olawale or Queen Funmilayo, and the absence of their leadership had left the kingdom in a state of unrest. Did you hear? They say the king and queen were ambushed on their journey, one courtier murmured to another, their voices laced with fear and uncertainty. Aye, and some even claim they were slain in battle, the other responded, their eyes wide with worry. As the rumors continued to circulate, the thugs and miscreants of Oyoland seized the opportunity to take advantage of the perceived power vacuum. Without the watchful eye of the king's warriors, they began to terrorize the common folk, extorting their hard-earned possessions and properties. In the streets, a burly thug approached an elderly woman, his face twisted into a menacing sneer. "Hand over your valuables, old crone," he growled, reaching out to snatch the necklace from around her neck. "Please, I beg you," the woman whimpered, clutching the necklace tightly. "This was a gift from my late husband. It's all I have left of him." The thug let out a cruel laugh, his companions joining in with raucous jeers. "Then you should have taken better care of it," he sneered, ripping the necklace from her grasp. Within the palace walls, a group of courtiers huddled together, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. "What are we to do?" one asked, his voice trembling. "Without the king and queen, who will protect us from these barbarians?" Another courtier shook her head, her eyes downcast. "It seems we are at the mercy of the lawless, with no one to enforce order or justice." As the situation spiraled further out of control, the people of Oyoland could only cling to the hope that their beloved rulers were still alive, and that they would return soon to restore peace and stability to the kingdom. Little did they know, King Olawale and Queen Funmilayo were indeed alive and well. Unaware of the chaos unfolding in their absence, they remained focused on regrouping their forces, determined to continue their search for their beloved daughter once their strength had been restored. Queen Funmilayo paced back and forth, her brow furrowed with concern as she surveyed her warriors. Many of them were visibly exhausted, their faces etched with fatigue from weeks of relentless travel. Some had even fallen ill, their bodies succumbing to the rigors of the journey, while others nursed injuries sustained along the treacherous paths. Mokowo approached her, his expression grave. "Your Majesty, we must address the dire situation at hand," he said, his voice low and solemn. Funmilayo nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her responsibilities. "Speak freely, Mokowo," she urged, bracing herself for his words. Mokowo gestured towards the ailing warriors. "Our brave men are reaching their limits. The toll of this unending quest has left them drained, both physically and mentally. If we continue at this pace, I fear we may lose more than just our path." The queen's eyes widened, a pang of guilt piercing her heart. In her single-minded pursuit of her daughter, she had failed to consider the well-being of those who had loyally followed her into the unknown. "You speak the truth, my friend," she acknowledged, her voice strained with emotion. "It pains me to admit, but our quest to locate Adaku has become increasingly futile. We have scoured every village, interrogated every elder, yet our efforts have yielded no tangible results." Mokowo nodded solemnly, waiting for her to continue. Funmilayo took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "As much as my heart yearns for my daughter's safe return, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to endanger the lives of these brave warriors' sons, husbands, and fathers themselves. Their well-being must take precedence over my personal desires." A heavy silence hung in the air as the gravity of her words sank in. Mokowo's eyes shone with a mixture of respect and admiration for his queen's selfless decision. "You have made a wise choice, Your Majesty," he said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "These warriors have followed you without question, but their loyalty should not be taken for granted. We shall make preparations to return to Oyoland, where they can seek proper rest and medical attention." Funmilayo nodded, her heart aching at the thought of abandoning her search for Adaku, but she knew it was the right course of action. Turning to face her warriors, she raised her voice, addressing them with a regal, yet compassionate, tone. "My brave warriors, it is with a heavy heart that I must announce our decision to return home," she began, her words carrying across the camp. "Our quest to locate Princess Adaku has been an arduous one, and many of you have sacrificed greatly in the pursuit of this noble cause." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the weary faces before her. "However, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to place your well-being at risk. You are not merely warriors, but sons, husbands, and fathers, the lifeblood of our great kingdom. Your safety and health must take precedence over any singular goal, no matter how dear it may be to my heart." A murmur of understanding rippled through the ranks, and Funmalayo saw nods of approval and gratitude from those who had pushed themselves to their limits. "We shall depart at first light," she declared, her voice ringing with determination. "Let us return to Oyoland, where you can rest and heal, and I can reassess our course of action. But know this, my love for Adaku remains steadfast, and I will not abandon her to an uncertain fate. We will regroup, recover our strength, and continue our search with renewed vigor when the time is right." As the warriors dispersed to make preparations for their journey home, Funmalayo turned to Mokowo, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, my friend, for reminding me of my duties as a leader," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A queen's primary responsibility is to her people, even when it means setting aside her personal desires." Mokowo bowed deeply, his respect for his queen evident in his every word and gesture. "You have shown true wisdom and selflessness, Your Majesty," he replied. "Your warriors will forever be grateful for your compassion, and Oyoland will prosper under your just and benevolent rule." With a heavy heart, yet a renewed sense of purpose, Funmalayo set about making the necessary arrangements for their return to Oyoland. Though her quest for Adaku had been temporarily derailed, she knew that her love for her daughter would never waver, and she would stop at nothing to ensure her safe return, even if it meant sacrificing her own desires for the greater good of her kingdom and her people. As King Akinwande's formidable forces pressed on, guided by the sacred map bestowed upon them by the Sirabasi, they found themselves drawing ever closer to their ultimate destination, the village of Agata, where the wayward Prince Azubuike and the Oyolander Princess Adaku were rumored to reside. The air was thick with anticipation, as the warriors could sense the impending confrontation that awaited them. Jagun, Akinwande's trusted bloodmaster, strode alongside his king, his eyes scanning the horizon with a keen awareness born from years of battle experience. As they approached a small village merely an hour's walk from Agata, Jagun couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping upon him. He turned to Akinwande, his voice low and grave. "My king, we draw ever nearer to our quarry," he began, his words laced with a hint of hesitation. "But I must ask, what fate awaits the prince and the Oyolander whore once we apprehend them?" Akinwande's stride did not falter, his gaze fixed ahead with unwavering determination. A cruel smile tugged at the corners of his lips as he pondered Jagun's query. "Ah, Jagun," he murmured, his voice carrying a chilling edge. "You need not concern yourself with the prince's fate. He shall face the consequences of his treasonous actions in due time." Jagun nodded slowly, sensing that his king had far more severe plans in store for the Oyolander princess. Akinwande seemed to pick up on his bloodmaster's unspoken thoughts, for he turned his head slightly, fixing Jagun with a piercing stare. "As for that Oyolander whore," Akinwande spat, his words dripping with contempt. "She has committed the gravest sin of all, daring to entangle herself with the heir to the Iwoland throne. For her audacity, she shall pay the ultimate price." Jagun felt a chill run down his spine as Akinwande's lips curled into a sadistic grin, his eyes burning with a ruthless intensity. "I shall take the life of that wretched creature," Akinwande proclaimed, his voice ringing with a terrifying certainty, "and I will ensure that my foolish son bears witness as I sever her head from her body with my own blade." A twisted sense of satisfaction seemed to wash over the king as he spoke those words, his thirst for vengeance and retribution palpable. Jagun, no stranger to acts of brutality himself, could not help but feel a twinge of unease at the depths of Akinwande's cruelty. Nevertheless, he bowed deeply, his respect for his king's authority overriding any qualms he might have harbored. "Your will shall be done," my liege, Jagun declared, his voice resolute. "The princess's fate is sealed, and your son shall learn the true cost of defying the sacred lineage of Iwoland." Akinwande nodded, his gaze once more fixed upon the path ahead. With a sharp gesture, he signaled for the warriors to press on, their footsteps echoing like the drumbeats of impending doom. As they marched, the air seemed to grow heavier, charged with the anticipation of the reckoning that awaited them in Agada. Akinwande's mind was consumed by visions of the gruesome retribution he would unleash upon the Oyolander princess, his thirst for her blood fueled by a twisted sense of justice and a desire to reassert the dominance of Iwalan's reign. Jagun, ever the loyal Bladmaster, fell into step beside his king, his own blade thirsting for the taste of treasonous blood. For in the world they inhabited, mercy was a luxury afforded only to the strong, and those who dared to defy the established order would face the full, merciless wrath of their rulers. King Olawal's heart raced with anticipation as his warriors rode closer to the village of Agada. They had been on the trail for weeks, following the map provided by the Seer Abasi, and now their quest was almost at an end. The thought of being reunited with his beloved daughter, Princess Adaku, filled him with immense joy. As they trotted along the dusty path, one of Olawal's trusted warriors, Kalu, rode up beside him. "Your Majesty," he called out, "we should be within sight of Agada any moment now." Olawal nodded, a broad smile spreading across his weathered features. "Excellent news, Kalu. I can scarcely contain my excitement at the prospect of embracing my daughter once more." Kalu chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "Aye, my king, and I imagine the joy on Queen Funmalayo's face when you present Adaku to her will be a sight to behold." At the mention of his wife, Olawal's smile softened, his expression turning wistful. "Indeed, Kalu, it has been far too long since Funmalayo has held our daughter in her arms. This reunion shall be a balm for her aching heart." As they rode, Olawal couldn't help but envision the joyous scene that awaited them. He pictured Adaku's radiant smile, her eyes shining with tears of happiness as she embraced her parents once more. And Funmalayo, his beloved queen, the unwavering strength that had sustained him through countless trials, he knew her relief and gratitude would be immeasurable. "Tell me," Kalu Olawal said, turning to his warrior with a curious expression, "how do you think the queen is faring on her mission? I can only imagine the burden she has shouldered in overseeing the return of Adaku." Kalu's expression grew pensive as he contemplated his king's question. "The queen is a pillar of strength and resilience, my lord," he replied after a moment. "Though the weight of her responsibilities must have been immense, I have no doubt that she has risen to the challenge with unwavering grace and wisdom." Olawal nodded, a swell of pride blossoming in his chest. "You speak truly, Kalu. Funmalayo's fortitude knows no bounds, and her love for our people is boundless." As they crested a hill, the village of Agada came into view, nestled amidst lush greenery and surrounded by fields of swaying crops. Olawal's heart leapt with anticipation, and he urged his steed forward, his warriors following close behind. "At last we have arrived," he called out, his voice ringing with triumph. "Let us waste no more time. We must locate Adaku and the Iwalan prince and bring this saga to its rightful conclusion." The warriors let out a resounding cheer, their spirits buoyed by the prospect of a successful mission and a long-awaited reunion. As they descended towards the village, Olawal's mind raced with possibilities, each scenario more joyous than the last. Yet, even in his elation, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning that not all paths led to a happy ending, and that the forces they were about to confront might be more formidable than they could ever imagine. But for now, he pushed those doubts aside, focusing instead on the love that had driven him to traverse this arduous journey. With Adaku's safety in his sights, and the promise of Funmalayo's radiant smile awaiting him, Olawal allowed himself to bask in the fleeting moments of hope and anticipation. For in times of great turmoil, it was those precious glimmers of joy that sustained the human spirit and fortified the resolve to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey back to Oyoland was a somber one for Queen Funmalayo and her weary warriors. Defeat hung heavy in the air, a palpable weight that pressed down upon their shoulders with each step they took. As they trudged along the well-trodden path, Funmalayo's gaze was downcast, her brow furrowed with a mixture of shame and disappointment. She had failed in her quest to locate her beloved daughter, Adaku, and the prospect of facing her husband, King Olawal, with such disheartening news filled her with dread. Mokowo, ever the loyal captain, rode by her side, his watchful eyes scanning the road ahead. Suddenly, he pulled on the reins of his horse, bringing the company to a halt. "Your Majesty," he called out, his voice laced with concern. "Do you see these tracks?" Funmilayo's gaze followed Mokowo's gesturing hand, and her eyes widened as she took in the multitude of hoof prints etched into the dusty path. There were too many to have been made by a single party, far more than Jagun's band of warriors could have left behind. What could this mean, she murmured, her mind racing with possibilities. Mokowo shook his head, his expression grave. "I cannot say for certain, my queen. They seem to be heading in the same direction we have just come from." A heavy silence fell over the group as the implications of Mokowo's words sank in. Funmilayo could feel a knot of dread forming in the pit of her stomach, a premonition that something ominous was afoot. Yet, as tempting as it was to linger and unravel the mystery of the tracks, Funmilayo knew that their priority lay elsewhere. With a weary sigh, she urged her horse forward once more, her warriors following suit. "We cannot afford to dwell on such matters now," she declared, her voice carrying a note of finality. "Our focus must remain on returning to Oyoland and tending to the well-being of our people." As they continued their journey, Funmilayo's thoughts turned inward, her mind consumed by the daunting task of facing her husband and delivering the news of her failure. She could already envision the disappointment etched across Olawal's features, the weight of her shortcomings bearing down upon her like a crushing burden. "How can I face him?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. "How can I look into his eyes and admit that I have failed him, failed our daughter, and failed our daughter, and failed our kingdom?" Mokowo, ever perceptive, cast a sidelong glance at his queen, knowing what she was thinking, suddenly said, "Your Majesty," his voice gentle yet firm. "You have not failed, you have made the difficult decision to preserve the lives of your warriors. Any true leader would recognize the wisdom and selflessness in such an act." Funmilayo managed a small, grateful smile, drawing strength from Mokowo's unwavering support. Little did she know, however, that her husband was not even within the palace walls, having embarked on his own quest to locate their missing daughter, a quest that would soon collide with forces far more formidable than any of them could have anticipated. King Olawala's heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread as he and his warriors entered the village of Agada. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the chance to find his beloved daughter, Princess Adaku, and the wayward Iwalan Prince Azubuike. Yet the possibility of returning empty-handed weighed heavily on his mind, threatening to shatter his resolve. The king inhaled deeply, steeling himself for the task ahead. Spread out, he commanded his warriors. Leave no stone unturned. We must find any information about these two individuals. And so, the search began. Olawale's men approached villagers, describing Adaku and Azubuike in vivid detail, but their efforts were met with blank stares and shaking heads. It seemed no one in Agada had any knowledge of the missing prince and princess. However, their inquiries did not go unnoticed. Malik, a streetwise youth known for his troublemaking ways, was lounging under a tree with his equally unruly friends, puffing on cigarettes and engaging in idle chatter. One of the warriors, undeterred by Malik's rough demeanor, approached the group. "You there?" he called out, his voice carrying an air of authority. "Do you know of anyone by the names of Azubuike or Adaku?" Malik's eyes narrowed, and a smirk played upon his lips. "Nah, man, don't know anyone with those names," he replied nonchalantly, taking a long drag from his cigarette. As the warrior turned to leave, a spark of recognition flickered in Malik's mind. Those names, they were the ones Baba Oruko had warned him and his friends to watch out for. If anyone came asking about them, they were to report it to the old fisherman immediately. The warrior, sensing something amiss in Malik's reaction, hurried back to King Olawale. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. "There was a young man in the village who reacted strangely when I inquired about the prince and princess. I believe he may be hiding something." Olawale's brow furrowed as he contemplated the warrior's words. "Is that so?" he murmured. "Very well, then. Follow this youth and observe his movements. But do not confront him directly. We must tread carefully lest we spook our quarry." The warrior nodded, his eyes alight with determination, and set off to trail Malik from a safe distance. Meanwhile, Malik had already sprung into action. Memories of Baba Oruko's warning fresh in his mind, he bid a hasty farewell to his friends and took off at a brisk pace, heading straight for the old fisherman's hut. Baba Oruko, who had just finished his morning routine, was startled to see Malik bursting into his compound, his eyes wide and his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Baba Oruko," Malik exclaimed, pointing towards the gate. "Those names you told us to watch out for Azubwaik and Adaku, there are warriors here in Agada, asking about them." Baba Oruko's eyes widened in shock, his weathered face paling as the implications of Malik's words sank in. He knew, in that moment, that the calm they had enjoyed in Agada was about to be shattered, and the lives of Alakija and Abidemi would be forever changed. As the warrior trailed Malik, he overheard the exchange between the youth and the old fisherman, his suspicions confirmed. Azubwaik and Adaku were indeed in Agada, and Baba Oruko seemed to be involved in their concealment. Without wasting another moment, the warrior turned on his heel and sprinted back towards King Olawale, his mind racing with the need to relay this crucial information and request backup. They were on the precipice of a confrontation that could decide the fate of not only the missing prince and princess but also the delicate balance between the kingdoms of Iwaland and Oyaland. While the warrior hastened to his king, Baba Oruko was already setting his plan into motion. He instructed Malik to fetch Alakija and Abidemi from their humble dwelling, knowing that their peaceful existence in Agada was about to be upended. Meanwhile, the old fisherman began preparing one of his boats, readying it for a hasty departure. As the village of Agada slumbered on, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within its borders, the wheels of fate were turning, setting into motion a chain of events that would forever alter the lives of those caught in its wake. The warrior's boots pounded against the dusty ground as he raced back to King Olawale, his heart hammering in his chest. He had discovered crucial information, and every second counted. As he approached the king, the warrior skidded to a halt, his lungs burning from the exertion. "Your Majesty," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "I have news." Olawale's eyes narrowed, sensing the urgency in his warrior's demeanor. "Speak," then he commanded, his voice carrying an air of authority. The warrior recounted everything he had overheard the exchange between the youth called Malik and the old fisherman, Baba Oruko. He relayed how Baba Oruko had reacted with shock upon learning that warriors were inquiring about Azubwaik and Adaku, and how he had immediately set plans into motion, likely to aid in their escape. As the warrior's words sank in, Olawale's expression hardened. "This Baba Oruko clearly knows something," he mused aloud. "Lead us to him, and we shall unravel this mystery once and for all." With a sharp nod, the warrior pivoted on his heel and began retracing his steps, his king and the rest of the warriors falling into step behind him. Meanwhile, in a humble hut on the outskirts of Agada, Alakija and Abidemi's peaceful existence was about to be shattered. Malik burst through their door, his eyes wide with urgency. "Alakija." "Abidemi," he exclaimed, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "We have to go. Now. Baba Oruko sent me there are warriors in the village asking about you too." Abidemi's eyes widened with fear, and a choked sob escaped her lips. Alakija, however, was frozen in shock, his mind struggling to process Malik's words. "What? What do you mean?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Malik shook his head impatiently. "There's no time to explain. Baba Oruko wants you to pack your things and come with me. We have to get you out of here before it's too late." Snapping out of his daze, Alakija sprang into action. He hastily gathered what few possessions they had, stuffing them into a small satchel. Abidemi, still trembling with fear, assisted him as best she could, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. As they emerged from their hut, racing through the pathway to Baba Oruko's hut, their eyes widened in terror at the sight before them. There, blocking their path, stood King Akinwande himself, flanked by the imposing figure of Jagun and a contingent of fearsome warriors who just emerged into Agada and luckily bombed into the air as they were about running away. Akinwande's lips curled into a cruel smile, his eyes blazing with a mixture of triumph and malice. Well, he purred, his voice dripping with menace. "It seems our errant prince and his Oyolander whore have been located at last." Alakija froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with tension as King Akinwande's eyes blazed with fury, his gaze fixed upon Alakija and Abidemi. "You foolish, foolish boy," he snarled, his words dripping with contempt. "So you choose to disgrace and embarrass me because of this Oyolander whore." Akinwande dismounted from his steed, his imposing figure towering over the terrified couple as he advanced towards them. Abidemi trembled uncontrollably, paralyzed by the sheer menace radiating from the Iwoland king's presence. "I hope this was worth it," Akinwande sneered, his piercing gaze locking onto Abidemi. "For this, dear, will be your last day on earth." He then turned his attention to Alakija, his eyes narrowing. "And you, I will make sure you watch as I cut off the head of the one you love." Malik, caught in the midst of the confrontation, could only look on in confusion, unsure of the events unfolding before him. His bewilderment was short-lived, however, as Jagun's booming voice cut through the tense silence. "You there," Jagun bellowed, his sword pointed menacingly at Malik. "Who are you?" Malik's voice caught in his throat, his eyes wide with fear as the Bloodmaster closed the distance between them, the tip of his blade mere inches from Malik's face. "I said, who are you?" Jagun repeated, his tone leaving no room for hesitation. Swallowing hard, Malik finally found his voice. "Baba Oruko sent me," he stammered. "He told me to retrieve Alakija and Abidemi. He said there were other warriors looking for them too." Akinwande's expression twisted into a mask of fury as he processed Malik's words. Other warriors, seeking Alakija and Abidemi. A sudden realization dawned upon him, and his eyes narrowed as he put the pieces together. "Who are these warriors?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Malik quickly described the strangers he had encountered, and Akinwande's suspicions were confirmed. Olawal. Somehow, the Oyolander king had discovered their whereabouts and was hot on their trail. For a moment, Akinwande's mind raced, attempting to discern how Olawal had obtained such information. But then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, he pushed those thoughts aside, his focus returning to the matter at hand. Turning to Jagun, Akinwande barked an order. "Secure Alakija and Abidemi. We depart for Iwoland immediately." As Jagun and the warriors moved to apprehend the terrified couple, Akinwande turned his attention back to Malik. "You," he said, his tone laced with menace. "Return to this Baba Oruko and inform those warriors that King Akinwande of Iwoland has captured their heir and is heading back to my kingdom." Malik's eyes widened, but Akinwande was not finished. "Tell them that if they wish to see their precious princess alive, they had best hurry to Iwoland. Otherwise, it will be too late." With a cruel smile twisting his lips, Akinwande turned and mounted his steed once more, secure in the knowledge that he had set a trap for Olawale, a trap designed to lure the Oyolander king into witnessing the ultimate price for defiance. As the Iwoland forces began their march towards home, Malik found himself sprinting back towards Baba Oruko's compound, his heart pounding in his chest. When he arrived, he was greeted by a scene of confusion and dismay. Baba Oruko sat on the ground, surrounded by Olawale's warriors, his expression one of utter defeat. Olawale himself turned to face Malik, his brow furrowed with concern. "Young man Olawale," Wal called out, "where are the people you were sent to retrieve?" Malik swallowed hard, his fear palpable as he spoke. "A man called Akinwande ambushed us on our way here," he began, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He told me to tell you that if you want to see your daughter alive again, you'd better start the journey back to Iwoland." Olawale's eyes widened in disbelief and rage. "Did you just say Akinwande?" he demanded, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. Malik could only nod, his gaze dropping to the ground as the weight of his message sank in. In an instant, enraged Olawale sprang into action, barking orders to his warriors to ready their mounts. They would depart for the two kingdoms immediately, for the stakes had never been higher. As the Oyolander forces prepared for their journey, Malik and Baba Oruko could only watch, their hearts heavy with pity and sadness for Alakija and Abidemi. Their lives, once so full of promise, now hung in the balance, caught in the crossfire of a conflict that threatened to consume them all. Baba Oruko rose to his feet, his eyes following Olawale and his warriors as they disappeared over the horizon. All he could do now was wish Alakija and Abidemi the very best, for he had done all in his power to protect them from the gathering storm. Yet, even as the old fisherman offered up his silent prayers, he could not shake the feeling that a cataclysmic reckoning was looming, a reckoning that would forever alter the course of their lives and the destinies of the two mighty kingdoms. The journey back to Ireland was a tense and foreboding one for King Akinwande and his men. They had succeeded in capturing the wayward heirs, Azubuike and Adaku, but the weight of the impending conflict hung heavy in the air. As they approached the Grand Palace, Queen Omosalo rushed out to greet them, her eyes widening in disbelief and joy at the sight of her beloved son, Azubuike. She hurried towards him, arms outstretched, but Akinwande's stern countenance caused her to pause. "My son, you have returned," Omosaloa exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. However, her joy quickly turned to confusion as she noticed the grim expression on her husband's face. Akinwande remained stoic, his mind already focused on the inevitable confrontation that loomed ahead. He had not only retrieved their disgraced heir, but had also captured the daughter of their rival kingdom, Oyoland. The king knew that this transgression would ignite a firestorm of fury from King Olawale. With a curt nod towards his queen, Akinwande barked orders to his men, instructing them to take up strategic positions and prepare for the imminent arrival of Olawale's forces. The stage was set for a clash of titans, and Akinwande intended to be ready. Days later, as Olawale and his warriors approached the gates of Ireland, a figure emerged from the shadows, Queen Funmaleo, her regal bearing undaunted by the gravity of the situation. She had received word of Akinwande's actions and the capture of the heirs, and she would not stand idly by. Striding towards her husband, Funmaleo took her rightful place at Olawale's side, a silent gesture of solidarity and unwavering support. Together they would face the challenges ahead, no matter the cost. As they entered the courtyard, Akinwande sat upon a throne, his expression one of smug satisfaction. Olawale wasted no time, his fury barely contained as he confronted his longtime adversary. "Where is my daughter?" Olawale demanded, his voice laced with rage. "I ask you again, where is my daughter, you soulless beast of a man?" Akinwande's lips curled into a cruel smile, his eyes alight with malicious glee. "I told you from the onset that one day you would regret ever having me as an enemy," he taunted, "for I will teach you a lesson you will never forget." Olawale's eyes narrowed, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. "What do you mean by that?" he growled, his patience wearing thin. With a casual wave of his hand, Akinwande summoned his bloodmaster Jogun. "Bring out the prisoners," he commanded, his voice dripping with disdain. Jogun emerged, dragging Azubuike and Adaku behind him, their hands bound in chains like common criminals. As Olawale's eyes fell upon his daughter, his heart constricted with a mixture of relief and anguish. Adaku's eyes were wide with fear, her once vibrant spirit diminished by the cruelty of her captors. Olawale's warriors surged forward, their blades drawn, intent on retrieving the princess by any means necessary. But Olawale raised his hand, halting their advance as Jogun pressed the edge of his sword against Adaku's slender neck. The king's expression was one of barely contained fury, but he knew that rash action could cost his daughter her life. The tension in the courtyard was palpable, the air thick with the promise of violence and retribution. Olawale's gaze locked with Akinwande's, their eyes burning with a hatred that had been simmering for decades. "Release my daughter, and we can settle this like men," Olawale growled, his voice low and dangerous. Akinwande threw back his head and laughed, a cruel and mocking sound that echoed off the palace walls. "Settle this like men," he sneered. "Oh no, my dear Olawale, you have insulted me for the last time, and the price for such insolence will be paid in blood." With a sharp gesture, Jogun tightened his grip on Adaku, eliciting a whimper of fear from the princess. Olawale clenched his fists, his body trembling with barely restrained rage. Funmaleo stepped forward, her regal presence commanding attention. "Akinwande, this madness has gone on long enough," she declared, her voice resonating with authority. "Release our daughter, and let us find a peaceful resolution to this conflict." But Akinwande's gaze remained cold and unyielding. peace," he spat. "There can be no peace until the line of Ireland is avenged for the transgressions committed against it." With those words, the courtyard descended into chaos. Blades were drawn, and the clash of steel echoed through the air as the warriors of both kingdoms engaged in a brutal melee, the fates of their heirs hanging in the balance. Amidst the chaos, Olawale's eyes never left Adaku's terrified form, his heart torn between the desire to protect his daughter and the knowledge that any rash action could seal her fate. As the battle raged around them, the two kings locked gazes once more, their eyes burning with a hatred that had transcended mere words, a hatred that could only be quenched by the spilling of blood. "What do you want?" Olawale asked, his voice laced with barely contained fury. Akinwande's lips curled into a cruel smile, his eyes glinting with malice. "Well, I want you to kneel before me and apologize," he sneered. "Accept that I am the lord over you." Olawale's eyes widened in disbelief. "Never," he roared. "I would never accept you as lord over me or my kingdom." Akinwande's expression hardened, and he turned to Jagun with a casual wave of his hand. "Very well then. Jagun, slit that whore Adaku's throat and allow her to bleed to death." Wait, Olawale cried out, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment he hesitated, torn between his pride and the love he bore for his daughter. Finally, with a heavy heart, Slowly, painfully, Olawale lowered himself to his knees, bowing his head before Akinwande in a gesture of submission. Tears stung his eyes, but he refused to let them fall, his pride the only thing he had left to cling to. Akinwande's smile widened, a sight more chilling than any blade. He turned to Jagun and gave a subtle nod, a silent command that would shatter the fragile peace forever. In a swift, merciless motion, Jagun's blade sliced through Adaku's slender throat, unleashing a torrent of crimson that spilled onto the courtyard stones. Olawale, his head still bowed, heard the sickening sound of steel parting flesh and felt warm droplets of blood splatter against his face. Slowly, he raised his head, his eyes widening in horror as he took in the gruesome sight before him. Adaku lay motionless on the ground, her lifeblood pooling around her, her once vibrant eyes now vacant and unseeing. Olawale's body went numb with shock, and he could feel hot tears streaming down his cheeks as a primal wail of anguish tore from his throat. Azubwike, too, was frozen in horror, his eyes wide and disbelieving as he witnessed the brutal execution of the woman he loved. Tears streaked his face, and he felt as though his own life had been extinguished alongside Adaku's. Queen Funmaleo collapsed to the ground, her body racked with sobs as she stared at the lifeless form of her beloved daughter. How could Akinwande commit such a heinous act, even after Olawale had acquiesced to his demands? The weight of her grief threatened to consume her entirely. Through it all, Akinwande remained unmoved, his expression one of twisted satisfaction as he basked in the anguish of his enemies. He reveled in their tears, their cries of sorrow serving as a symphony to his ears, a testament to the depths of his cruelty and the absolute power he wielded over their lives. But as the king of Ireland allowed himself to revel in his triumph, a sudden movement caught his eye. Queen Funmaleo, her face contorted with rage and grief, had risen to her feet. With a swift motion, she snatched a guard's discarded spear, her eyes blazing with the fury of 1,000 suns. Without hesitation, she hurled the spear towards Akinwande, her aim true and her intent deadly. The projectile whistled through the air, its trajectory set to strike the heart of the man who had so callously stolen her daughter's life. Time seemed to slow as the spear arched through the air, the courtyard holding its collective breath in anticipation of the fateful moment when it would either meet Akinwande or fall harmlessly to the ground. In that frozen instant, the fates of kingdoms hung in the balance, hanging upon the razor's edge between justice and oblivion.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Kindly click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Watch out for more intriguing and eye-catching videos from your favorite YouTube channel.